Good morning. We are here for our first session of the Gifts of Imperfection or Wholehearted Faith, which is the series that we're going to begin for Lent. And I thought I would sort of go over sort of some housekeeping things of how we're going to do this. So you guys should have already gotten the book and had a chance to look it over. And there was a little bit of homework each time for each session. It's not punitive. If you don't get to it, you still should come. But you will get more out of it if you've read the book and if you've read the scripture for the day. So this first week, we're going to sort of dive into what is the concept of wholehearted faith. What is this kind of all about? And then the next bunch of sessions we're going to be looking at these guideposts. And the guideposts are sort of helpers to support the work that we do within our own selves. And Brene Brown calls this the work. And what she's referring to the work is self-awareness, therapy, talking to other people who are worthy of your story. She talked about in that book that we need to find folks who we can have trust and have honest conversation with, and that's really important. I was also re-listening to where the idea for this whole thing came from was this summer. I'm a big podcast listener, and this summer on her podcast, Unlocking Us, Brene did a discussion for 6 weeks with her sisters about this book. And as I was listening to it, I was like, 6 weeks. This is like perfect for Lent. And it's all about wholehearted living. And the first scripture for Lent this year happens to be about our hearts. And it's this passage from written by David about creating me a clean heart. And what does it mean to have a whole heart and to sort of be all in and be aware of yourself? And I was like, wow, this really goes together really well. So if you want another thing to do, which I know is ridiculous, that's a great series to listen to on the podcast. It's Unlocking Us, and it starts on June 23rd of 2021, and it goes for 6 weeks, and it was really good. But she wrote this book, so Brene Brown wrote this book in her mid-40s, and she said that this is a midlife book. And a lot of times we hear midlife and we think midlife crisis, but it's really more of an unraveling. And her definition of that I thought was really good, and I wanted to share that with you. But I also wanted you to listen to it with not just midlife in mind, because not everybody here is at midlife, but also we are getting to the end of a pandemic. We've all experienced some big tectonic shifts in our life, some things that would bring up things that typically come up at midlife. But there are also things that come up at quarter life and come up at later in our life. These are things that just come up. And I think naturally in the year of sorry, my nose is itchy. I guess somebody wants to kiss me. I wish they would just get it over with. But Lent is a season in the church when we look at what is shifting in our life and pay attention to it. And so what she's saying, because Brene Brown is a social worker, she's secular. She does have a religious background, but that's not what she puts in the front of what she does. And if you listen to her podcast or read her book, by the way, I forgot to give you a language warning. I apologize for that. She's Texan. She speaks like she speaks. And my generation has a propensity for sort of overlooking that. So I'm sorry if anybody was offended by the language. But I hope that's something you can get past. So at any rate, she calls this book The Midlife Unraveling is where it came from. It's the time in your life when the universe gently grabs you by the shoulders and whispers, I am not effing around, playing around. All of this pretending and performing, these coping mechanisms that you've developed to protect yourself from feeling inadequate and getting hurt, this has to go. Your armor is preventing you from growing into your gifts, and I understand you needed these protections when you were small or when you were younger or at different phases of your life. I understand that you believe your armor could help you secure all the things you needed to feel worthy and lovable, but you're still searching and you're more lost than ever, and it's time, and time is growing short. There are unexplored adventures ahead of you. You can't live the rest of your life worried about what other people think. You were born worthy of love and belonging. Courage and daring are coursing through your veins, and you were made to live this life with love and with your whole heart. It's time to show up and be seen. And I thought that was a really great sort of we're at the end of a pandemic. A lot of us feel like the world has totally shifted. We're also entering into this season of Lent, this time when we're called to slow down and examine our hearts and examine what in our lives is working, what in our life is working, and what in our life is no longer serving us. And we have to decide what we're going to keep and what we're going to jettison and how we're going to sort of do that as we integrate our faith into our life. Because one of the biggest tasks of Christians, I believe, is to take all this stuff we believe and actually live it, to put it into practice and to live it with integrity and to be authentically and wholly ourselves. That's hard. And I mean holy like whole, not holy, because the only one that's truly holy is Jesus. But it's a spiritual awakening. And I think that's really important. And we come to a point in our lives where we have two options. We have change or sort of double down on where we've been and stay stuck. So this is an opportunity, this book is an opportunity for us to sort of clean house, as you said, is sort of look at where we're at and make some assessments and to get a little bit more self-aware and a little more mindful of where we're at. And it's something that I need too, which is why the book appealed to me as well. And they say that preachers have one sermon, they just preach a different iteration of it every Sunday. And this speaks to me. I think there's a lot here that's not just for myself, but for others. And I talked with the staff about this book before we brought it. And I got some really good feedback. I got interesting feedback sort of generationally and from different folks. But a lot of them said, this is a book that everybody should read. At one point in your life, you should read this book. And I think that's really cool. So that's sort of where we're at. I'm going to turn in the book to page 3, and I want to read that quote. In fact, does somebody else want to read? Because you guys hear a lot from me. And what I'm talking about is the quote at the very beginning, below Wholehearted Living and above the Journey heading.
Let me get there. I read all that before. Okay, hold on. Introduction?
Yeah, it's under. So start at the Wholehearted Living is about engaging our lives, and then stop before it says the journey.
Wholehearted living is about engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness. It means cultivating the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough. It's going to bed at night thinking, yes, I am imperfect and vulnerable and sometimes afraid, but that doesn't change the truth that I am also brave and worthy of love and belonging.
So this is the beginning of this book. And I think, wow, that's really good for Lent. And if we look at our scripture for today, which is Psalm 151, which let me give you a little bit of backstory. And I'm sort of going to give you the kind of synopsis.
It's 51.
51. I don't know what I said. I'm sorry. I said 150. Okay, good grief. 51. Psalm 51. Which is the very familiar passage we have heard most of our lives. Create in me a clean heart, O Lord. Create a right spirit within me. But this passage, this psalm was written by David. And I wanted to give you a quick sort of synopsis of David's journey. Because if we don't know David's journey, then these are just pretty words. And we want to be a bit more mindful about what we ingest. So here is have you ever heard of the 3-minute Hamlet, where they give the 3-minute synopsis of Hamlet? This is the less than 3-minute synopsis of David, so hang on. All right, so David was born. He's the youngest son, and he is anointed by Samuel to be the next king of Israel. So they go and they look, is this the last son? Is this the last son? And they finally get to David, and he's the one that Samuel, the prophet Samuel, anoints. And then David serves in the court of Saul, and he plays the guitar and plays music and stills the sort of madness that is starting to become part of who Saul is. Then we hear about David and Goliath, and David is the one who's like, I got this, why are you guys being weenies? And so off he goes, and he slays Goliath with his sling, which is really cool, and I preached a sermon about that a while ago, and it's really good, about the different 5 stones that he had skill and trust and a few other things that I can't remember. Saul becomes jealous of David, but then also promises his oldest daughter, but then tricks David, and he doesn't get to marry the oldest daughter. He ends up marrying Michal. Saul tries to kill David. Michal, the daughter, saves him with Jonathan's help, who is his best friend. Eventually, David becomes the king. He dances in his underwear before the ark. Hooray! And then we hear about Bathsheba, which was this woman who was up having her monthly bath up on top of the roof. And it would have been the appropriate thing for the Jewish man to do at that time was, if you notice that, to turn around and not tempt himself. But instead he was like, whoo. And he ended up committing adultery with Bathsheba. Then he finds out that Bathsheba's pregnant, and he's like, oh, what do I do? So he sends Uriah, her husband, out into the front of the battle, and he tells his soldiers to actually step back and leave him all by himself. So, of course, he gets killed. And then Nathan, his friend, comes and rebukes him with this really cool story about a sheep, about a man who had lots of sheep and a man who had only one sheep, and the one sheep got taken away. And David has this epiphany moment. He has this moment when he realizes, I have not been living a wholehearted, authentic life. I am not in line with what God has called me to do. I have forgotten the anointing that happened so long ago. He's forgotten what his name means. By the way, David means beloved, which is what God calls us, which is really cool. Side note, beloved is really cool because we know that God calls himself I am, which if you conjugate becomes to be. So, and also just be. So then all those be words become God loved, beloved, right? Belong. Belong. Or belong, longs for us. I don't know. It's really cool. I kind of nerd out on that. That's a Louis Giglio thing. But David, his name means, in the Hebrew, it means beloved. It means a man after God's own heart. That is who, and sort of, he's always this sort of comparison to, he's the foil to Saul. So Saul is, sort of the ultimate kind of bad guy, bad king, descended into madness. And then we have David. And David was incredibly not perfect. But what David had going for him, that we as Christians have access to as well, and all believers in God have access to, is an awareness of our own self. So David wrote Psalm 51 in response to Nathan's saying to him, dude, you screwed up. And instead of just descending into self-pity or wallowing, although a little bit of this is, David recognizes, and then he repents, and he asks for a clean heart. And there's a reason we start Lent off with that, because Lent is this season when we realize that we have a need for God's help. Some people call it the self-help season of the year, of the calendar, the church calendar, but I think it's more accurate. Cal said when we had our staff meeting, actually it would be more accurate to say that this is the season in the church year when we recognize that we need God's help versus having our own bootstraps to pull up. That doesn't work that way. So there's a little bit of David's context, and David has this sort of woke moment, this wholehearted moment, this courageous moment, this compassionate moment to himself. And he steps out of his story and realizes, wait a minute, I need to look at my life from a little bit of a balcony view, and I need to do some changes. And that's where he writes this Psalm 51. And I wanted to read a little bit of it from the Message translation, because I know you guys have already read it from your various translations, but you might not have read it from the Message. And I like the way that this is phrased, and it might spark something different in us as well. Typically, each week I'll read the scripture. I still want you to read it at home, because I might read it from a different translation. But I am going to go ahead and read that, and then we're going to dig through the book a little bit. Psalm 51, the Message. Generous in love, God give grace. Huge in mercy, wipe out my bad record. Scrub away my guilt. Soak out my sins in your laundry. I know how bad I've been. My sins are staring me down. You're the one I've violated, and you've seen it all. You've seen the full extent of my evil. You have all the facts before you. Whatever you decide about me is fair. I've been out of step with you for a long time, in the wrong since before I was born. What you're after is the truth from the inside out. Enter me then and conceive a new true life. Doesn't that sound like shame? It sounds like some of those shame stories. And he had the right person to pour out his shame to. He poured it out to God, and God listened to his story. Just like in Brené's example, talking about shame and finding the right person to get you out of that shame storm or that shame cycle, David sat and wrote this prayer to God. I'm going to keep going. Soak me in your laundry, and I'll come out clean. Scrub me, and I'll have a snow-white life. Tune me into foot-tapping songs. Set these once broken bones to dancing. Don't look too close for blemishes. Give me a clean bill of health. God, make a fresh start in me. Shape a Genesis week from the chaos of my life. Don't throw me out with the trash or fail to breathe holiness in me. Bring me back from gray exile. Put a fresh wind in my sails. Give me a job teaching rebels your way so that the lost can find their way home. Commute my death sentence, my God, my salvation, my God. And I'll sing anthems to your life-giving ways. Unbutton my lips, dear God, and I'll let loose with your praise. Going through the motions doesn't please you. A flawless performance is nothing to you. I learned God worship when my pride was shattered. Heart-shattered lives ready for love. Don't for a moment escape God's notice. Make Zion the place you delight in. Repair Jerusalem's broken down walls. Then you'll get real worship from us, acts of worship, small and large, including all the bulls that they can heave onto your altar. God's word for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So it's a little bit different version, but I thought it was interesting, and I wanted to go to page 11 to look at Mary Daly's definition of courage. And then I kind of wanted to get into that discussion around shame and knowing who to share your story with and the power of sharing your story. So Mary Daly is a theologian. We got to meet her, not actually meet her, but I meet her work when I was in seminary. She is most interesting. At one point in her life, somebody called her an old battle axe. And she, instead of getting offended about that, she wore battle axe earrings and really took that on as, all right, I'll show you, in a good way and a healthy way for the rest of her life, which is really cool. So she's kind of a tough lady in the theological world, and one of the first women to sort of pave the way to talk about theology from a feminine perspective. So she says on page 11 that courage is like a habitus, a habit of virtue. You get it by courageous acts. It's like you learn to swim by swimming. You learn courage by couraging. The same is true for compassion and connection. So the way that we live wholeheartedly is we live with courage, compassion, and connection. And courage is when we stand up to sort of the shame cycles that we have in our heads. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes the voice in my head or the reel in my head is kind of negative and can be kind of mean. And there are times even when I'm like, ugh, just shake it out. But the best way for us to get rid of those shame cycles is to have the right people to talk to. And for us to say, what is going on? And to find the right people to say, to give us. So if you go over to page 15, sorry, I don't mean to be so scattered. Welcome to ADHD. But the most dangerous thing we can do after shaming experience is hide or bury our story. If we bury our story, the shame metastasizes. And they've done studies now, by the way, that if we don't deal with our stuff, it actually does physically affect us. If we keep our pent-up emotion, if we keep shame in the inside, if we keep anger on the inside, and don't find healthy and appropriate ways to get rid of it, we can't just jettison that on anybody. But if we don't find appropriate ways to get it, it can actually, they have proven, it can cause us to get cancer, it can cause us to have heart disease, it can cause us to have high blood pressure. It damages the body if we don't get rid of these things, which is fascinating. So finding the right people with whom we can share our story is really, really powerful. And maybe we have to be like David, and we feel when the only one we feel we can pour ourselves out to is God. Maybe some of us need to become psalmists and write these psalms and pour them out. I had a teacher in school when I was getting my master's of Christian education who wrote, she had just went through a divorce and this really painful, awful time, and it was abuse involved and just bad. And she went on a retreat and wrote her prayer out, her psalm out on toilet paper. She wrote all of the things that she was mad at. She raged, she lamented, she praised, and it was a lot of just getting it all out so it wouldn't haunt her forever. And then at the end of her retreat, she used the toilet paper and flushed it, which is a bit dramatic. It's a bit dramatic, but it is a way, and it is a visceral reminder that we've got to find a way to handle this. We can't just bury it down or stuff it down. We have to find a way to deal with shame. We have to find a way to deal courageously with life. We have to find a way to be compassionate with ourselves and with others, and also to find connection, because we are wired for connection. Babies will flirt because they are born. Like, babies will actually, they know how to flirt. Not like romantic flirting, I don't mean like that, but I mean like where they smile and they're cute, because they know, evolution-wise, the body knows that making a connection with the big people keeps them safe. It keeps them fed, keeps them warm, and these are things that even little people know because we are wired for connection. So I wanted to point out that we have people in our lives who we can talk to, and we know immediately upon talking to them that we've made the wrong choice because about a shame story. So say we have something really crappy that happens, and we call up our mom, and she might say something totally wrong. Or you call up a girlfriend, and they say something wrong. Because we have to be careful how we receive these stories. One, we need to ask people, are you in a good place? Like, can I talk something out with you? And if they say no, honor that. But I liked how Brene sort of lined up this sort of sympathy versus empathy, and sort of gave examples as she went down this list of 1 through, how many is it anyway? 8 of different ways to receive the information. Like, some people will say, I feel sorry for you. Some people will say, you should feel shamed. You should feel ashamed. That's not helpful. And some people will say, you've let me down. Some people will say, this feels terrible. Who can we blame? Like, all right, I'll go beat him up for you. Some people say, let's just make it go away. We won't talk about it. Some people will say, if you think that's bad, let me tell you about my story, which some people do out of trying to create a connection. So it comes from a good place, but it's not always helpful. Some people will say, don't make anybody upset. Don't ruffle the feathers. Don't do that. Some people will say, I can fix this and I can fix you. And what we can see modeled in David's psalm is an outpouring of the whole story in a safe context, and God receives that. And it changes David's heart. And then the psalm, of course, the reading ends with, create in me a clean heart, so that I will be repentant unto you, O God. I know, we've got lots of sirens today. Of course, whenever we're recording, that's what happens. But one of the things I wanted to sort of highlight about that was not for us to sit and think about all the people who we've tried to share a story with and it went terribly wrong. What can we learn? How can we help one another, the collective we, not just the people in the room, but the we, with receiving stories well, with helping people to move on from shame, for helping people to really transform their lives. Because I know it sounds trite, and I say it lots of times, that we're meant here to change. We're meant to come here on the earth to find our purpose, to change the world, which I know for a lot of folks is like, okay, she's like lost it and has grand ideals. But I really do think that we're here to change the world, and one of the best ways to change the world is one-on-one, with people one-on-one, and by hearing their stories and helping work through that is really valuable. And you can change someone's outlook on life, and you can change their whole perspective. And I thought that was really worth pointing out. And I wondered what you guys thought about the things on shame. Did that resonate with you? Yeah.
It's, and you mentioned being mindful.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of stuff out on mindfulness, self-help.
It's a big thing right now.
Yeah, big thing. And so everybody jumps on that, and of course we're jumping on this, and we're bound to get something out of it. I mean, bound to.
Yeah.
And I know she's from Texas, and we do say bless your heart. But, you know, I mean, with all this material, how could we not get something out of it, and with you teaching it?
Well.
So, yeah, I think I never thought about shame quite like that.
Yeah. And I think it's something too, when we talk about shame, we like your posture got smaller.
Yeah.
Mine does too. And we
Right.
kind of want to be like, oh, I don't want to talk about shame.
I'm so
And
ashamed
yet,
of myself.
and
Yeah.
yet, of all the places where we should be able to talk about shame openly and safely, should be church.
Yeah.
Because God has ways for us to deal with that, because God knows, because God made us, that if we keep that within ourselves, it's going to wreck us. It's going to wreck us, which is just fascinating. That's what Brene talks about a lot about. Do your work. Do your work. Do your work. Be aware of what's going on in your body. Be aware of what's going on in your brain. Be aware of the interactions of others. And know that the only thing you can control in any of it is yourself. I know.
But that's when
That's the hard
you
part.
understand that, and I'm guilty of this because I'll think of a person, and then I'm thinking something that they said or they did
Mm-hmm.
that sets me off.
Yeah, that's a trigger for you.
And I'll say, oh Lord, don't let me go there.
Yeah.
Don't let me go there. Take this, I'm seriously.
Yeah.
Take this away from my mind.
Yeah.
And don't even let me think about it. I mean, and then maybe a week later, I realized I really hadn't thought about that in that length of time.
Yeah. But it
Now,
comes back up
so
again.
what I was gonna
It comes
say,
back
it
up.
probably comes back.
It comes back up again. And so what this book is offering is tools to deal with it so that you can truly set it aside. And so that we can have this clean heart that David is talking about. We can have this unburdened heart. And that doesn't mean we burden other people. We have to think who we share our story with. Some of us need to find professional folks to talk to. As a clergy person, I have a therapist. I think that's really important. I advocate for that. I think if you're a helping profession person, like teacher, everybody on the planet should have somebody to talk to, whether it's a paid professional or a good friend. We all need people to have discourse and dialogue, and somebody to also say, are you really sure that's the story? Is that the real story, or is that the story you're telling yourself? Because I've been guilty of that too. Like you walk out of a meeting and you're like, that just didn't not here, of course. Casey has been beautiful.
We're so perfect.
But you walk out of a meeting, you're like, what? Ooh. And then, you start processing it and you realize that you're telling yourself your version of how it happened. And we have to stop and look and get that sort of balcony perspective, that different perspective, and that look for the connection, like maybe somebody else who was there, like, what did you think happened? Or what was your perspective? That need for connection. And also that need for compassion. Like, we're not going to get everything right, so we have to have compassion on ourselves to try again. And that David highlights that really well too. But this idea of having compassion on ourselves. One of the things that I'll give you the benefit of my Reynolds teaching. So I got into the Reynolds program for the leadership, which I've been going to, and we're almost done with it, which is sad because it's been sort of one of the things that saved my life in this season. But they taught us something called the SBI, which is a way of having a boundary and also holding someone accountable in a way that's kind. But it's terrifying because I don't want to hold anybody accountable. It might make them mad. Or, like, that's really feels confrontational, but it's not meant to be. But an SBI is a specific situation. So we're going to make one up, Zali. You're going to be my example.
Oh my God.
So, but this is fake. This is totally fake, okay?
Yeah, right.
So the specific incident was you and I had a campfire and you ate too many marshmallows and I didn't get any
took 'em
marshmallows.
all.
You took them all. Yeah. And this is totally pretend. And so that's the S, the specific behavior. The B is the specific time, and then the B is the behavior. So specific incident was when we were at the campfire. The behavior was you ate all the marshmallows, and then the impact on me, that hurt my feelings because I didn't get any marshmallows, and they're one of my favorite treats. And they're gluten-free, and I don't get to eat them very often. Mm-hmm. So it hurt my feelings. And then you give that to the person, and then they can respond, or they can just be like, oh, I'm sorry, I won't do that again, or whatever. But that tool has proved to be very helpful because one of the things that I learned from reading here is that compassionate people have boundaries. Compassionate people are boundaried people. So they also have empathy and care, but also here's where my humanness is separate from your humanness. And I have empathy and I can feel and I can I can help, but also you have to do your own work too. And I thought that was really interesting. And it made me think as I was reading, I was like, oh man, I should probably tell them about this SBI thing, because it's been one of those things that's been very, very helpful to me in my leadership life and style, because my previous experience was with kids. So with kids, you can be like, stop doing that. And you can be really direct and kind of bossy, and they just have to kind of be obedient. And with grown-ups, you can't do that. So it's been a little bit of a learning curve to figure out how do we have compassionate boundaries and clear expectations, so that things still get done. And so that the mission.
Would that fall under confrontation, though?
It would fall under confrontation, but I think it also falls under compassion, because
Well, I think the compassion might be easier, or,
yeah.
handle it a little
Being
better.
compassionate.
Yes, being compassionate, but also if we let somebody step all over our boundaries again and again and again, when we eventually have had enough, we're not going to be kind about it. So I thought that was interesting, this idea of boundaried people. Compassionate people are also boundaried people. I thought that was cool. One of the things I wanted to highlight about connection is on page 31, was that the sort of this, and I wrote next to it, this is kind of like the crux of what it means to be connected and also wholehearted. So it's kind of down towards the bottom of the page. It says, the wholehearted journey is not the path of least resistance. It's the path of consciousness and choice. And to be honest, it's a little countercultural, which is what we're supposed to be in our faith, right? We're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. The willingness to tell our stories, to feel the pain of others, and to stay genuinely connected in this disconnected world is not something we can do half-heartedly. To practice courage, compassion, and connection is to look at life and the people around us and say, I am all in. And I thought that was really worth pointing out, because we need to be all in. We kind of can't do, we shouldn't do faith with one butt cheek on the horse. Like, we need to be all in. And I thought that was really interesting. I want to check and see how we're doing on time, because I don't want to keep us longer than an hour. And there's a couple more things I wanted to highlight in the book, and then I wanted to give you guys a chance to sort of say what you thought and what did you read, because I know all of you did your homework, which is so good. I'm so proud of you. I wish I had stickers to hand out. And I don't mean that in a belittling way, just I think stickers are cool. All right, so page 33, I have a note here to tell you something about worthiness, so let me slide over there and see what that was. Here's what's truly at the heart of wholeheartedness. Worthy now, not if, not when. We are worthy of love and belonging right now, right this minute, as is. And that made me think of the idea of Imago Dei, which we preached a little bit on Sunday. This idea that Imago Dei is Latin, and it means we're all made in the image of God. And if we are all made in the image of God, then I need to bow to and see the image of God in you, and you can see that in me, and we honor that. And if we're made in the image of God, then we're not something that is unworthy, right? That we can't be. We can't be unworthy. Our behaviors might stink, but our own personhood, who we are, is worthy. And we need to do our work to improve our behaviors or our attitude or all of the things that we get the chance to dig into later with the guideposts. But at the core of who we are made in the image of God. We are all children of God. We are lovable. We are loved. We are beloved, as David's name reminds us. And I thought that was an interesting sort of theological tie-in to something secular, and a reminder that we have this intimate connection to God because God is our creator. So I wanted to highlight that. And then my next little note is page 36. Oh, did you guys see the definitions of love and belonging on page 36 and 37? I thought those were really interesting. And I wanted to make sure that we had seen those. So she defines love as we cultivate love when we allow ourselves to be our most vulnerable and when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known, and when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. Love is not something we give or get. It is something we nurture and grow, a connection that can only be cultivated between two people when it exists within one each one of them. And we can only love others as much as we love ourselves. I thought that was really important too. We can only love others as much as we love ourselves. I know that one of the biggest questions of millennials, my generation, I'm 40, is, are we normal? And is this normal? Oh, okay, that's normal. Okay, good. I'll just keep going then. Good. Because not everybody knows what they're doing. But also, am I lovable? And I think that's not unique to the millennials. I think that's every generation. Am I lovable? Am I loving? Is this normal? Okay. All right. And once we sort of know that within ourselves, we know our own worthiness, we stop hustling for it, which I think is important. And then the other definition was about belonging. She said belonging is the innate human desire to be part of something larger than us, which I think we as people of faith have access to even more so than the general public because we know God. So if we truly believe what we say every Sunday, our Father who art in heaven, or the Apostles' Creed, all those things that we believe, we know that we are part of something much bigger than ourselves, which is really cool, actually. And our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. I wanted to highlight that too, because again, it's that understanding of worthiness. Because if we think we're completely unworthy and that we are merely toads upon the earth, which some of us, like this sort of shrinking idea, which is why I'm crouching down, some of us grew up with the idea that fire and brimstone idea that we're nothing without God and that we're nothing without, and I don't know if that serves us well. I think it is more powerful to stand on our understanding of worthiness, not in a way that's arrogant or in a way that belittles other people, but to just inherently know in your core that you are valuable, that you are worthy, that you belong, that you are courageous, that you are compassionate. Once we've done our internal work and continue to do our internal work because it's an ongoing thing, we have access to this kind of foundation to stand on. And I don't know about you, but I've seen people out in the world and you realize, wow, they don't have that. They don't have that foundation of knowing who they are. And it's uncomfortable.
And be confident in that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I've been guilty of it for sure. And we have different points in our life when we struggle with that of being okay in who we are. But that's that idea of worthiness, and that's sort of the work that's ongoing that we need to keep doing. And it's reinforced when we find safe places to belong, the right people to tell our stories to, when we make those courageous choices, when we address things that cross our boundaries with compassion, and don't let things fester up. It's pretty cool. So, and then I wanted to almost read page 52 to 55 out loud to you, but I won't because that would be really boring. But this idea of shame resilience really resonated with me. I'm actually going to... The very last page, 65, says, our stories are not meant for everybody, and we've highlighted that. Hearing them is a privilege, and we should always ask ourselves before we share the story, who has earned the right to hear my story? And one of the things my therapist would add is why are you telling the story? That's an important question, too. Who has the right to hear your story, and why do you need to share the story? But this Shame Resilience 101, I thought was really good and wanted to make sure you guys had seen that. It's this idea that we have the ability to stand up to shame. And I think another name for shame, if I could be so bold, is maybe evil, or even the devil. I know in the Methodist Church we don't talk about the devil much, but he exists, or they exist. But shame is something we all have, and we're all afraid to talk about it. And the less we talk about the shame, the more it has control over our lives. Shame is basically the fear of being unlovable. It's sort of that root back to, like, am I normal? Am I lovable? That is the basement of what we're looking at in terms of shame is am I lovable? And it's an intensely painful feeling that everybody has, and yet we don't talk about it. So I wanted to talk about, to feel shame is to feel human. Shame resilience is the ability to recognize shame and to move through it constructively while maintaining worthiness and authenticity, and to ultimately develop more courage, compassion, and connection as a result of this experience. the first thing we need to understand about shame resilience is that the less we talk about shame, the more we have it, which I thought was really powerful. And I wanted to make sure that you guys had heard that. And we have an opportunity in the scripture we read to hear some of David pouring out that shame. Wash me clean. I know I've sinned. I realize what I did with Bathsheba. I realize what I did with Uriah. I realize what I did with my life. I realize how far off the path I am, dear Lord. Am I still lovable? Will you still love me? Will you redeem me? Will you restore me? Will you create a resurrection within my heart, within my life? Which is what Lent gives us all access to. It gives us access to the opportunity to say, Lord, am I lovable? Can you restore me? Can you help me to see that within myself so that I can then live a way that's authentic and wholehearted, and then so that I can pour into others and help them to live wholeheartedly too, through your power, not my own. Good. What did you guys find from reading? You've heard me preach for 45 minutes.
Well, just to say that she went through a lot of trauma herself.
Oh, yeah.
She knows what it's like.
Yeah.
To go through a divorce, to go through a remarriage, and several of my daughters are reading her books. And I was just talking about being confident about your worthiness.
Yeah.
There could be a whole book on worthiness. There could be a whole book on confidence. So that'll probably be the next issue. I don't know. But,
Her latest book, The Atlas of the Heart, is all
Right.
about emotions.
Right.
And it has sections on those topics. I had to set it aside so I could focus on this, but I want to read that one
She's
too.
written, 5 or 6 books, and
Yeah.
they're reading them.
Yeah, they're very good.
In fact, they said to me just over the weekend, I brought the book to read, which I waited till I got back. But anyway, we had a 2 and a 4-year-old. But anyway.
Yeah, hard to get things done.
They saw the book on the table and said, "Oh, are you reading her books?" They couldn't believe it. Because it's more of their, I guess I would say, type of book. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Cool, Sally. I made you cool.
Yeah, I feel worthy.
But yes, it is. And
But she says it like it is.
she does.
And it's something to chew and think about and swallow.
Yeah.
So,
And then figure out what
what I'm going to do about what I've learned, just
Yeah.
like everything else you read,
Yeah.
what you get out of it.
Yeah.
So
Anybody else?
she's very smart, that's for sure.
Yeah.
She's a scientist.
She's a-
not just
yes.
a author and all that. She's
Yeah.
a social scientist.
She is a social scientist, and she has a couple really good TED Talks. She has a
she's
good
done
TED Talk on
She's
shame.
talked all over the world. Yeah.
Good TED Talk on shame if you want to learn more about that topic. And she's also done a really good one on vulnerability that is famous.